The courtroom silence. The throne room of the alien empire was built to make hearts tremble. Tall pillars of shining stone reached the ceiling like frozen lightning. Golden banners with strange alien symbols floated above the crowd. The smell of incense drifted in the air while armored guards stood like statues on both sides. Every noble, every advisor, and every servant inside the palace had gathered for this meeting. They whispered and waited for their queen. The great doors opened with a sound that echoed like thunder. The alien queen entered slowly, her long robe trailing behind her. Her crown glowed with jewels that shone like captured stars. Her eyes were sharp, her presence heavy, and no one dared to breathe too loudly. Behind her walked her young child, small and fragile. Yet carrying the blood of the empire, the child clung to her robe for comfort as the nobles bowed. The queen raised her hand and the entire hall fell silent. Every eye followed her steps as she moved toward the throne. She walked with grace, but her mind was full of heavy thoughts. The empire was restless, threats were rising from outside, and even whispers of rebellion spread inside. This gathering was meant to show her power, to remind them that the queen was strong. But fate had prepared something that no one could have imagined. As she reached the throne and sat with a cold expression, the child stepped forward. The queen expected her heir to stand by her side proudly, but instead the child froze, eyes wide, breathing quick as if sensing something strange. The queen frowned slightly, trying to understand, then, in a single heartbeat, the child turned and ran. The sound of small feet echoed against the stone floor. The nobles gasped, confused, their whispers rising again. Guards looked to the queen for orders, but the queen herself was frozen in place. The child ran past the line of nobles, past the guards, and past the rows of advisors. Then the child stopped suddenly behind a human. The hall fell into silence so deep that even the torches seemed to hesitate in their burning. The human stood stiff. Unsure of what was happening, he was an outsider, a simple guest brought to the court for reasons none found important. He had no rank, no wealth, and no power in this empire. Yet here stood the queen's child, clutching the back of his cloak with trembling hands. The human's eyes widened as every alien eye in the room turned toward him. The queen's chest rose and fell sharply, her hands gripping the armrests of her throne. For a moment she thought she had seen wrong. But no, it was real. Her heir, her only child, was hiding behind a human, one of the weak creatures her people considered simple and unimportant. Her mind raced. What did this mean? Why did the child do this? Her heart felt something strange she had not felt in many years. It was fear. The nobles began to murmur in shock. Some whispered of curses, others of omens. Advisors leaned toward each other, their faces pale with disbelief. One of the guards whispered, "This is impossible." The queen's advisors demanded answers, but none came. The only sound was the child's quick breathing as they pressed against the human's back. The human swallowed hard, raising his hand slightly as if to show he meant no harm. He wanted to speak, to explain, but there was nothing to explain. He himself did not understand why the child had chosen him. The guards moved one step forward, waiting for orders. The queen lifted her hand slightly to stop them. Her eyes locked on the human. Why would her own child, heir to the throne of a great empire, run to this outsider? The weight of the hall pressed down on everyone. The queen tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She could feel the gaze of every noble piercing her back. Her pride told her to rise in anger, to punish this insult. But her heart whispered something else. Something was not right, and she knew this moment would not be forgotten. The court would remember this forever, and the future of her throne might change because of it. The child looked up at the human with wide, trusting eyes. The human lowered his head slightly, trying not to appear bold. But in that simple act, something powerful filled the air the child had chosen, and no force in the hall could deny it. The queen's fingers tightened around her throne. Her heart pounded with fury, confusion, and a fear she could not admit, and in that silence, the destiny of the empire began to shift. The human stranger. The court remained frozen, the whispers of nobles fading into heavy silence. All eyes were fixed on the human, who stood stiff like a soldier facing judgment. He had never been the center of such attention. He was only invited to this gathering because of a minor service he had given to one of the palace workers. No one even remembered his name when he entered the hall, but now the entire empire would remember him forever. The child clutched the human's cloak tightly. Trembling as if hiding from a monster, the human turned his head slightly, whispering in a low voice, "It's all right. "You are safe," he said softly. The child's grip tightened, and the trust in those small eyes shook the heart of everyone who saw it. The nobles exchanged looks filled with rage and confusion. For them, humans were insignificant creatures, barely worth notice, and yet the royal heir was clinging to one as if their life depended on him. A noble stepped forward, his jeweled robe sweeping the ground. "Your Majesty," he cried, his voice filled with anger. "This is sorcery. This outsider has bewitched the royal blood," others joined, their voices rising like a storm. "This human is dangerous. Remove him at once." The guards tightened their grip on their spears, ready to drag the man away, but the queen lifted her hand, and silence fell again, her eyes sharp as blades. Locked on the human, he bowed awkwardly, not daring to look at her directly. "My queen," he said slowly, his voice unsteady. "I do not know why the child hides behind me. I have done nothing." His honesty was clear, his words simple, yet his presence burned in the hall like fire. The queen narrowed her eyes, her voice cold and sharp. "Step forward, human. Show yourself to my court." The man hesitated, but the child tugged at him. Refusing to let go, he took a slow step forward, his boots echoing in the silent chamber. The nobles leaned in, their suspicion growing with every heartbeat. The queen studied him as if trying to pierce through his very soul. The human was not dressed in noble garments, his clothes were plain, the mark of someone who worked with his hands rather than ruling with commands. Yet there was something in his stance, something steady and unshaken even under 1,000 eyes. He looked like someone who had faced storms before and survived. And now he stood before the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. The child peeked out from behind him, still refusing to move closer to the queen. Whispers spread again, sharper this time. Why does the heir fear the mother? Why choose him? What secret lies here? The queen clenched her teeth, rage building, but a strange weight pressed against her heart. It was not weakness she felt, but doubt, and that made her furious. One of the oldest advisors, his beard silver and his robe marked with runes, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this is an omen," he said softly. "Long ago it was written, when the child of the crown hides behind an outsider, the throne itself will tremble." The queen snapped her gaze at him, her voice sharp. "Enough. Old fool," she growled. But the damage was done. The words had already poisoned the hall. The nobles now looked at the human with both fear and hatred. The human felt the weight of their eyes, but he stood still. He knew one wrong word could mean his death. Still he lifted his voice once more. "My queen, I swear I have no desire to offend you. I am no threat to your throne." But the child pressed closer to him, and in that moment his denial meant nothing. The image was already burned into the minds of all. The heir of the empire choosing a human protector. The queen leaned back in her throne, her fingers tapping the armrest slowly. She wanted to command the guards to seize him, to tear the child away and crush the insult. But her eyes betrayed her. She could not ignore the way her child clung to him. She remembered the trembling hands, the wide eyes filled with trust for the first time in many years. She hesitated, and the hall noticed it. That single hesitation was enough to shake the foundation of her rule. The nobles bowed their heads together, whispering like snakes. The queen falters, "May the prophecy is true, may the throne will fall." The human stood quietly, unaware of the storm his presence had created. He only wanted to protect the small life trembling behind him. But in doing so, he had unknowingly placed himself in the center of a galactic struggle, and above them all the queen's heart raged with fire. Her pride demanded action. Her love for her child demanded restraint. She could not show weakness, yet she could not deny the truth her eyes had seen. The court waited, the silence heavier than stone. Every word, every breath, every decision from this moment on would decide the fate of the empire. And all because one child chose to hide behind a human. The queen's dilemma. The queen sat high upon her throne, her crown shining but her heart unsettled. The sight before her was wrong, so wrong that even her breath felt heavy. Her child, the heir to the empire, clung to a human instead of her. It was a wound deeper than any blade. The hall waited in silence, every noble, every advisor, and every guard watching her every move. One wrong choice and she could lose their loyalty. One weak moment and her throne could crumble. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp and cold as she studied the human. Her mind raced with questions. Had he done something in secret? Had he cast a spell? Had he touched the mind of her child? No, he did not look like a man of power. He did not even wear armor or jewels. He looked ordinary. Yet somehow the ordinary had broken the laws of her palace, and in that moment, she realized the truth. Ordinary could sometimes be more dangerous than mighty. Her advisors whispered among themselves like vultures around prey. "Majesty, we must test him. Prove his innocence or guilt," one said. "Punish him now before the seed of doubt grows," another hissed. "Exile him, strike him down, remove this shame," a third added. Their voices pressed against her mind, each one urging her to act swiftly. But the queen's eyes flickered to her child. The small hands gripping the human's cloak were not hands of fear alone. They were hands of trust. Her heart twisted, memories flashing like lightning. She remembered holding that child for the first time, promising protection against all enemies. Now the child had chosen another, and that choice cut deeper than any blade. Was it weakness to let this continue, or was it wisdom to understand why? The nobles leaned closer, hungry for her decision. Her silence stretched longer, and in silence doubt grew like a shadow. The human lowered his head again, his voice quiet but clear. "My queen, I beg you to believe me. I have no magic, no secrets. I am nothing more than what you see." His words were simple, but they carried something the nobles could not understand. They carried honesty, raw and unpolished. The queen's eyes narrowed, searching for lies, but she found none. That unsettled her even more, for in her court, every noble hid lies like treasures, yet this human stood bare. The old advisor with the silver beard stepped forward again. He raised his hand slowly, his voice shaking as he spoke. "The prophecy cannot be ignored, Majesty. When the child of the crown clings to a stranger, it is the beginning of change. The stars themselves have written it." The queen's hand slammed down on her throne, the sound cracking like thunder. "Enough," she growled. Her voice cutting through the hall, the old man bowed. But the seed he planted could not be pulled out now. The nobles exchanged looks, their eyes sharp, their whispers poisonous. The queen's rage burned, but beneath it, a hidden fear began to grow. What if the prophecy was real? What if this moment was not just shame, but destiny? Her heart fought her mind, her pride fought her love. The empire demanded strength, but her child demanded trust, which was greater. The throne or the bond between mother and child. Her silence stretched again, and the hall held its breath. Finally, she raised her voice, her words slow and heavy. "Then let the truth be tested," she said. Her gaze fell upon the human, her tone like steel. "You will face a trial. Human, if your heart is clean, it will be revealed. If it is not, you will be broken before this court." Gasps spread through the nobles, their whispers like fire spreading across dry leaves. The child shook their head quickly, pressing closer to the human's back. The queen saw it, and her chest tightened, but she forced her face to remain cold. The human nodded slowly, though fear shone in his eyes. "I will face what you command." "Majesty," he said softly. The nobles smirked, certain this outsider would be crushed. The guards raised their spears in salute, ready to drag him to whatever test the queen prepared. But deep inside, the queen's heart whispered, if the test destroyed him, what would happen to her child? Would her heir ever forgive her? Or would she lose both throne and child together? Her dilemma grew heavier with every heartbeat. The court saw a queen of stone, unshaken and proud, but inside, she was a storm of fire and doubt. The choice she had made tonight would echo across the empire, and she knew no matter the result of the trial, nothing in her world the noble uproar. The queen's words echoed through the throne hall like thunder. "A trial will reveal the truth," she declared. At first, silence held the chamber, the nobles too stunned to breathe. Then, as if a dam had broken, the uproar began. Voices clashed against each other like swords. "Majesty, this is madness," one noble cried, his jeweled crown shaking with anger. "Why waste time with a trial? He is human. His guilt is clear," another shouted. "This is weakness, Majesty. Punish him now or risk the empire's shame." The sound rose louder, filling the hall like a storm, advisors argued. Guards shifted uneasily, and servants shrank against the walls. The old advisor with the silver beard spoke again, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The trial is destiny. Let the stars reveal what the heart of this man hides." Half the hall roared in support, half roared in fury. The queen gripped the arms of her throne, her jaw set tight, her heart beat faster, not from fear of the nobles, but from fear of her child's wide, desperate eyes. The child clung tighter to the human, small fingers digging into his cloak. Tears trembled at the corners of their eyes, but they did not let go. Every noble saw it, and it struck them like fire. To them, the air was sacred, the symbol of the empire, and yet the sacred air had chosen to hold onto a human. The insult to their pride was unbearable. One noble, tall and armored, stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his blade. "Majesty, this cannot stand," he roared, his voice like a beast. "If you will not punish this creature, then let me strike him down for you." Gasps filled the chamber, and the guards tightened their grips on their weapons. The human froze, his breath caught in his throat. But before the noble could take another step, the queen raised her hand sharply. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice like steel. The hall fell silent again. The noble lowered his head, but rage burned in his eyes. He turned his glare upon the human, promising vengeance with a look alone. The queen saw it, and though she did not speak, her heart darkened further. Her court was splitting, her power trembling. And all of it because of this one fragile moment. The nobles began whispering again, their words venomous. "She protects him. She falters. She is no longer the Iron Queen." The whispers stabbed at her pride. She had ruled with fear for decades, and now that fear was breaking, but she forced her face into a mask of stone. The human looked around nervously, his voice shaking as he finally spoke. "I mean no harm. I have no wish for your throne. I only want peace." His words sounded weak to the nobles, but to the child they were strong. The child looked up at him with eyes full of trust, and that trust was more powerful than all the jewels in the hall. The queen noticed, her chest heavy with emotions she refused to show. The uproar grew once more. "Exile him," one shouted. "Burn him," another cried. "Let the child be cleansed of his touch," said a third. The hall echoed with demands for blood, for punishment, for strength. The queen's eyes swept across them, each face twisted with fury or fear. Her empire was tearing itself apart before her very eyes. She struck her staff against the floor, the sound like lightning breaking the storm. "Enough!" she roared. Her voice shaking the pillars, the nobles fell silent, trembling at the sharpness of her command. Her eyes burned as she looked at them all. "You forget yourselves," she said coldly. "You dare question my judgment, you dare demand blood before my throne. You dare test me." The silence deepened, their anger now mixed with fear again. But though she had silenced them, she could not silence her own heart. The child's soft grip on the human's cloak spoke louder than all the nobles combined. Why, she wondered, why does my heir trust him more than me? The question burned in her chest like fire, and though she did not speak it, the entire court felt the weight of it in the air. The nobles bowed, but their thoughts were not loyal. Already they plotted in whispers. Already they imagined a future where the queen's throne was weaker. The old advisor whispered again, almost too softly for her to hear. "The stars are moving, Majesty. Destiny has begun." Her hands clenched around the armrest, her fury boiling. But her eyes betrayed her as they drifted once more to the human, and the hall knew deep inside that this story was far from over. It would ever be the same again. The test of loyalty. The queen's command had silenced the uproar, but silence did not bring peace. Every noble still burned with questions, with anger, with fear. The human stood in the center of the hall, the child still clinging to his side. The queen's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward on her throne. Her voice rang cold across the chamber. "If you are innocent, then let a trial of loyalty decide your fate." The words spread through the court like fire. Nobles whispered eagerly, some smiling with cruel satisfaction. At last the human would be exposed, at last the queen would crush this insult. The human swallowed, but his feet remained steady. "I will face whatever trial you command," he said. His words trembled, but the resolve behind them made even the guards pause. The queen raised her hand and the great doors of the hall opened. A group of priests entered, their robes covered in ancient runes. They carried with them a glowing crystal. Heavy with the weight of tradition, it was known as the Stone of Truth, an artifact older than the empire itself. Legends claimed it revealed the heart's loyalty. If a soul was false, it shattered. If a soul was true, it burned with light. The nobles bowed as the priests placed the crystal upon a pedestal before the throne. Its glow cast shadows across the hall, making every face look hollow and sharp. The queen's voice was sharp. "Touch the stone, human, and let the empire see what lies within you." Gasps filled the air. The nobles leaned closer, hungry for his downfall. Even the guards shifted forward, ready to act if the stone broke. The human stepped forward slowly, the child's small hand still clutching his cloak. He knelt before the stone. its light pulsing like a beating heart. He could feel its warmth on his skin, a strange weight pressing into his chest. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "I have nothing to hide. Let the truth speak." And with steady hands he placed his palms on the crystal. The hall held its breath. For a moment nothing happened. Then the stone began to glow brighter, light spreading across its surface. The priest's eyes widened. Whispers broke out among the nobles. Instead of shattering, instead of dimming, the stone blazed with a brilliance no one expected. It was not just truth, it was loyalty. A loyalty so pure the crystal burned with golden fire. The child gasped softly, their small fingers tightening on his cloak. The nobles staggered back, some covering their eyes from the glow. "This is impossible," one shouted. "No human could shine like this," another cried. The old advisor with the silver beard whispered, his voice trembling, "The stars. The prophecy is real." The queen's lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. She had expected betrayal, weakness, corruption. But what she saw was something else, something that tore at her pride. The stone revealed loyalty, not to the throne, not to the court, not even to her, but to the child. The light pulsed stronger when the air pressed closer to him. The bond between them was undeniable. The nobles erupted again, their fury even louder than before. "He has stolen the heir's heart. This is witchcraft disguised as purity. Destroy him before the empire falls." The guards raised their weapons, awaiting the queen's signal. But her hand trembled against her throne. Caught between command and hesitation, the human looked up, the golden glow reflecting in his eyes. "My queen," he said firmly, "I swear to you, I have no desire for your throne, no hunger for your power. I would give my life to protect your child, that is all." The child's voice broke through, soft but clear. "He is my protector," the heir cried. Gasps spread like lightning. The court nearly collapsed from shock. For the heir had spoken, not in whispers, not in fear, but in front of the entire empire. The queen's heart pounded like war drums in her chest. Her child had declared loyalty to this human for all to hear. No noble could erase those words. No soldier could silence them. The empire had heard its future, and the future was wrapped in the arms of a human. The queen clenched her fists, her teeth grinding as her pride battled with her heart. Every noble screamed for blood, for strength, for justice. But her child's voice echoed louder than all of them. "My protector." The words would haunt her dreams. And in that moment, the queen realized her throne was no longer the only power in the hall. The bond between her heir and the human had already become something greater than fear. The hidden truth, the throne hall shook with voices, nobles screaming for punishment, priests whispering of omens, guards gripping their weapons tighter. But above all the noise, one truth had already been spoken. The heir had called the human their protector. That single word carried more weight than an army. And the queen, though her face was stone, felt her heart shatter inside. She rose slowly from her throne, her robe flowing like fire. The nobles bowed their heads, but their whispers did not stop. They demanded answers, demanded justice, demanded blood. But the queen raised her hand and all voices froze. Her gaze locked on the human, cold and piercing. "Why does my child call you protector?" she asked, her voice low but sharp as a blade. The human hesitated, sweat on his brow. He had wanted to stay silent. He had wanted to stay invisible. But now there was no escape. The entire empire waited for his words. He took a slow breath, his voice steady though his heart raced. "Because once in secret, I saved them," gasps ripped through the hall. The sound louder than thunder. The queen's eyes widened slightly, though she hid her shock quickly. The nobles shouted, their rage exploding like fire. "You dare lie to us? Impossible, no one touches the royal heir without the queen's blessing." The queen slammed her staff against the floor, the sound silencing them all. Her voice was sharp, demanding. "Explain," she commanded. The human lowered his head, his memory pulling him back. "It was many moons ago. I was only a worker in the lower halls carrying supplies to the palace kitchens," he said. "I saw the child wander alone, no guards nearby, no nobles watching. Only silence." His eyes darkened at the memory. Then a shadow came from the garden, a beast not of this palace, not of this world. It slipped past the guards unnoticed. The hall froze, whispers trembling in the air. The nobles exchanged horrified looks, for no one had ever dared admit such a breach. I had no weapon, no training, nothing but my hands, he continued. But I threw myself before the beast. I dragged the child away. I shielded them until the guards came. His voice grew quiet, almost breaking. I told no one because I feared punishment for stepping near the heir. But the child remembered, and from that day, they never forgot me. The child nodded quickly, their small voice cutting through the silence. It is true, he saved me. I remember his arms, his voice. He kept me safe. Gasps filled the hall again. Nobles turned pale, some clutching their robes. The queen's lips trembled, but she forced them still. Her mind burned with fury at her guards for failing, at herself for not knowing, at fate for betraying her. But behind that fury was something far more dangerous. Doubt. The old advisor with the silver beard lifted his head, his voice trembling. The prophecy speaks, Majesty. The outsider who shields the heir will change the empire's path. The nobles roared in protest. No prophecy will bind us, one shouted. He is a liar, cried another. But their words sounded weak, for the truth stood clear before them. The child themselves had spoken. The queen's eyes burned into the human. You hid this from me, she whispered, her voice a storm held behind stone walls. Yes, the human admitted, his voice firm though soft. I hid it because I feared you would see it as an insult, not as what it was. An act of protection. The queen's nails dug into her throne, her pride screaming to punish him, her heart whispering to trust him. She had ruled by fear, by strength, by never showing weakness, but in this moment, her own child's trust in the human was stronger than her throne. The nobles pressed forward, voices rising once more. Majesty, remove him. Exile him, destroy him before he poisons the air. This cannot be allowed to stand. The hall shook with their fury, but the queen barely heard them. Her mind was locked in battle against itself. Her throne or her child, her pride or her heart, her empire or the bond before her eyes. The child's small voice broke through the storm once more. Mother, please, he is mine, he kept me safe. Do not take him away. The queen's chest rose sharply, her control slipping for a single breath. The hall fell silent, for the heir had spoken again. And this time it was not just trust. It was a plea, a demand, a truth no noble could deny. The queen closed her eyes. For the first time in years, her iron mask cracked. She had faced enemies on 1,000 battlefields. She had crushed rebellions, silenced traitors, ruled with unshaken might. But now she faced something far greater, her own child's heart. And she realized that the truth could no longer be hidden. No matter how much she wished it, the throne room remained still, waiting for her decision. Every noble, every priest, every guard, every servant. Holding their breath, the queen opened her eyes, her gaze burning with fire and sorrow. The hidden truth had been revealed, and the empire would never be the same again. The queen's choice. The throne room was silent, yet the silence was heavier than war drums. Every noble leaned forward, every guard stood frozen. Every priest lowered their head, waiting. The truth had been revealed. The child had spoken, the human had confessed. Now all that remained was the queen's decision. Her crown felt heavier than ever before, pressing on her head like chains. Her robe, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a burden wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes burned as they locked onto the human, and then drifted to her child. The heir's small hands were still wrapped tightly in his cloak. Refusing to let go, she could feel the eyes of her entire empire on her. Her choice in this single moment would decide the fate of generations. The nobles began whispering again, unable to hold their tongues. Majesty, do not falter, one hissed. End this insult, another urged. If you protect him, you betray your throne, a third spat. Their voices stabbed at her ears, sharp and cruel. But louder than all of them was the single word echoing in her mind. Protector. Her child had spoken it not once but twice, her child. The heir she had sworn to guard with her own life. Her pride screamed for punishment. Her throne demanded blood, but her heart whispered that without this human, her child would never feel safe again. She clenched her fists, nails cutting into her palms. Never in her reign had she hesitated this long. Never had her people seen her falter. Yet here she was, torn between power and love. The old advisor stepped forward, his silver beard glowing in the light of the crystal. Majesty, the stars have spoken, you cannot escape destiny, he said softly. The outsider who protects the heir must not be destroyed, for to strike him is to strike the future itself. The nobles roared in fury, their voices filling the hall. Lies, treason. Do not let old words bind the empire. But the queen raised her hand, and the storm of voices fell silent once more. Her eyes locked on the human, her voice deep and sharp. "Step forward," she commanded. The human obeyed slowly, his steps echoing across the stone floor. The child followed, refusing to release him. Together they stood before the throne, one man and one child against an empire. The queen's gaze burned into him, searching, testing. Finally, she spoke, each word heavy with power. "You stand in my hall before my throne, before my empire," she said. "You claim no power, no ambition, no hunger for rule, yet my child clings to you as if you were their shield." The hall trembled in silence. Her voice hardened. "If I strike you down, I keep the loyalty of my nobles, but I lose the heart of my heir." Her eyes narrowed, her tone like fire. "If I protect you, I keep my child, but I risk the rebellion of my court." The nobles leaned closer, waiting, the guards tensed, prepared for war. The priests held their breath, their eyes on the glowing crystal. The queen closed her eyes, the weight of her throne crushing her spirit. Then, with a deep breath, she made her choice. Her voice thundered through the hall. "This human will not be harmed," she declared. Gasps exploded across the chamber, nobles recoiling as if struck. "This human has shown loyalty. Not to me, not to the throne, but to what is most precious in the empire, my heir." She rose from her throne, her presence towering over them all. "Any who raise a hand against him will raise a hand against me." The hall erupted, some in fury, some in awe. Nobles shouted in protest, their faces red with rage. "This is madness," one screamed. "She betrays the empire," cried another, but others bowed, trembling. Unable to deny the will of their queen, the guards froze, torn between loyalty to their ruler and loyalty to the court. The old advisor lowered his head, whispering, "The stars have chosen, and so has the queen." The human bowed deeply, his voice steady though his heart shook. "My queen, I ask for nothing, only that I may keep my promise to protect your child." The air clung tighter, their small voice breaking the storm once more. "He is mine. He is my protector." The queen's chest tightened, but she did not look away. Her decision had been made, and though it might tear her empire apart, she would not betray her child. The nobles withdrew slowly, their whispers sharp, their plots already forming. The hall was no longer united. Cracks had formed in its walls, but the queen stood tall, her eyes burning with iron. Her throne might tremble, but her child was safe, and in that moment, she chose not as a ruler but as a mother. The empire would never forget this day. Some would call it weakness, some would call it destiny, but all would remember the moment when the alien queen froze, because her child had hidden behind a human. And from that choice, the future of the galaxy began to change.